The fluorescent lights of Henderson and Associates hummed their usual monotonous tune as Marcus Chen leaned back in his ergonomic chair, surveying the trading floor from his corner office on the 32nd floor of the Chicago Board of Trade building. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Lake Michigan stretched out like a sheet of hammered steel under the overcast November sky, whitecaps dotting its grey surface as the wind whipped across the water. At 34, Marcus had built a reputation as one of the sharpest commodities traders in the city. His track record spoke for itself. 7 consecutive profitable quarters, a corner office before he turned 33, and a salary that had recently cracked 7 figures. He'd earned every bit of it through calculated risks, meticulous research, and an almost supernatural ability to read market trends before they materialized. But lately, Marcus had noticed a shift in the office dynamics that irritated him like sand in an oyster. The firm's diversity initiative had brought in a wave of new hires, and management seemed more interested in optics than actual trading acumen. It gnawed at him during morning meetings, festered during lunch breaks, and now, watching the new analyst stumble through her first presentation, it boiled over. Jade Williams stood at the front of the conference room, her hands trembling slightly as she advanced her PowerPoint slides. She was 26, fresh out of Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management with an MBA in finance, and this was her 3rd week at Henderson and Associates. Her navy blazer was slightly too big for her slim frame, probably borrowed or bought on a budget, and her natural hair was pulled back into a professional bun that somehow still managed to look uncertain. "As you can see from the data," Jade said, her voice wavering just enough for Marcus to notice, "the agricultural commodities sector is showing unusual volatility patterns that don't align with traditional seasonal fluctuations. I believe there's an opportunity here if we—" "You believe?" Marcus interrupted, not bothering to hide the condescension in his tone. Several heads turned toward him, but he kept his eyes fixed on Jade. "This is a trading floor, not a philosophy seminar. We deal in certainties, not beliefs." Jade's jaw tightened, but she maintained her composure. "What I mean is, the data suggests you've spent too much time in academic theory and not enough time understanding how real markets actually function," Marcus said, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. He walked toward the presentation screen, his expensive Italian leather shoes clicking against the polished floor. "See, this volatility you're so excited about? It's noise. Market correction. Anyone with actual trading experience would recognize that immediately." The conference room had gone silent, except for the muted sounds of the trading floor filtering through the glass walls. 20 pairs of eyes watched the exchange with varying degrees of discomfort. Sarah Rodriguez, the senior managing director, shifted in her seat but didn't intervene. It was a test of sorts, Marcus knew. The trading floor was Darwinian by nature, and if Jade couldn't handle pressure in a conference room, she'd never survive the chaos of actual trading. "With respect, Mr. Chen," Jade said, her voice steadier now, a spark of defiance in her dark eyes. "I've analyzed 15 years of comparable data sets, and this pattern is distinct. It's not noise, it's a systematic shift driven by climate change impacts on crop yields and emerging market demand. The fundamentals have changed." Marcus almost laughed. Almost. Instead, he picked up the remote and clicked through her slides, stopping on a particularly complex chart showing correlation matrices. "You know what this tells me? That you can use Excel and you've read some trendy articles about climate economics, but charts don't make trades. Instinct does. Experience does. Something you clearly lack." Perhaps we should table this discussion and reconvene," Sarah interjected, her diplomatic tone attempting to diffuse the tension. But Marcus was on a roll, his competitive instincts fully engaged. He'd built his career on being right, on outthinking and outperforming everyone around him. The idea that this inexperienced newcomer might have spotted something he'd missed was intolerable. "Actually, I have a better idea," Marcus said, a smile spreading across his face, the kind of smile a shark might wear if sharks could smile. Let's make this interesting. A wager. Jade's eyebrows rose. Excuse me? You seem so confident in your analysis. Put your money where your mouth is. Marcus pulled out his phone and opened his banking app with theatrical flair. I'll give you $10,000. Real money. Your own trading account. You have 6 months to prove your theory isn't just academic nonsense. If you can turn that 10,000 into 15,000 or more using your strategy, you keep everything, the initial capital and all profits. The room erupted in murmurs. Sarah leaned forward. Marcus, I don't think... And when you fail, Marcus continued, talking over her, you admit publicly that experience matters more than theory, and you agree to shadow me for 3 months to learn how real trading works. Deal? Jade stood perfectly still, processing the offer. Marcus could see the wheels turning behind her eyes. It was a no-lose proposition for her financially. She was playing with his money. But the public humiliation if she failed? That would be career-defining in all the wrong ways. The smart move would be to decline gracefully, maybe laugh it off as inappropriate. Marcus waited, expecting her to back down, to reveal that her earlier confidence was just bravado masking the same uncertainty all rookies felt. Instead, Jade set down her presentation clicker and walked toward him, her posture straightening with each step. When she was close enough that only he could hear her initial whisper, she said, "Make it 20,000. Marcus blinked. "What? 20,000? Jade repeated, louder this time. Her voice carried across the room with newfound authority. "If you're so certain I'll fail, double it. And when I succeed, not if, when, you publicly acknowledge that diverse perspectives and new analytical approaches have value. Plus, you donate 50,000 to the scholarship fund for underrepresented students in finance programs." The conference room had gone completely silent. Even the ambient noise from the trading floor seemed to have faded. Marcus felt every eye on him, weighing his response. His initial instinct was to laugh her off, but he'd painted himself into a corner. Backing down now would look worse than losing the bet. "Fine," he said, extending his hand. 20,000, 6 months. We'll set up the account Monday morning. Jade's hand met his in a firm shake. Her palm was slightly sweaty, but her grip was steady. "I'll have my strategy outline on your desk by tomorrow." "I won't bother reading it," Marcus said, releasing her hand. "I'll be too busy doing actual work." As Jade returned to gather her presentation materials, Marcus caught Sarah's expression, a mixture of concern and calculation. She'd let this play out, but he could tell she wasn't thrilled. The other analysts and traders in the room were already pulling out their phones, no doubt texting colleagues about what had just transpired. By end of day, everyone in the building would know about Marcus Chen's $20,000 bet. Marcus returned to his corner office, the adrenaline from the confrontation still coursing through his veins. Through his window, the November clouds had darkened, and the first drops of rain began streaking the glass. He pulled up Jade's employee file on his computer, skimming her credentials with fresh eyes. Northwestern MBA, top of her class. Undergraduate degree from Howard University in mathematics and economics, summa cum laude, 3 summer internships at major investment banks, a published paper on algorithmic trading strategies in emerging markets. On paper, she was impressive, but paper credentials didn't mean anything in the real world of high-stakes trading. His phone buzzed with a text from his colleague David Park. "Dude, what was that? 20K? Are you serious?" Marcus typed back, "Easy money, she'll crater by month 3. But even as he sent the message, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered doubt. He'd seen the look in Jade's eyes when she countered his bet. That wasn't uncertainty. That was conviction. The rain intensified, pelting the windows with increasing force. Marcus watched the droplets race down the glass, merging and splitting in chaotic patterns. Markets were like that, he thought. Chaos masquerading as patterns. The trick was knowing which patterns mattered. and which were just noise. He'd spent a decade learning that distinction through trial, error, and painful losses early in his career. The idea that Jade could shortcut that learning curve with some academic analysis and beginner's luck was laughable. Markets humbled everyone eventually. They'd humble her too. Marcus opened his trading dashboard and began reviewing his positions for the day. Corn futures were up 2% on speculation about South American crop failures. Soybeans were flat, consolidating after last week's rally. Wheat showed unusual strength, probably driven by geopolitical tensions in Eastern Europe affecting Black Sea exports. Everything made sense when you understood the fundamentals and had the experience to interpret them correctly. Jade would learn that lesson the hard way. By 5:30, most of the office had cleared out. The trading floor's frenetic energy had given way to the quiet hum of overnight systems and cleaning crews. Marcus stayed late, as he always did, reviewing tomorrow's economic calendar and preparing his trading strategy for the week ahead. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email from Sarah Rodriguez with the subject line, "We need to talk." Marcus opened it. "Marcus, while I appreciate competitive spirit, today's exchange with Jade Williams crossed several lines. We need to discuss appropriate professional conduct and the firm's liability regarding informal betting arrangements between employees. Please see me first thing Monday morning before market open. Also, between you and me, I've reviewed Jade's analysis. It's not as far-fetched as you suggested. You might want to give it an actual read. Sarah." Marcus closed the email without responding. Sarah was covering her bases, protecting the firm from potential HR issues. But she'd let the bet stand. That was the important part. And her comment about Jade's analysis, that was just politics. Sarah had to appear supportive of the new diversity hires. He gathered his things and headed for the elevator. The building's lobby was nearly empty, just a security guard reading something on his phone and a cleaning crew polishing the marble floors. Outside, the rain had settled into a steady drizzle, and the streets of Chicago's financial district glistened under the streetlights. Marcus's Tesla was waiting in his reserved spot in the underground garage. As he drove through the rain-slicked streets toward his Lincoln Park condo, he replayed the day's events. $20,000 was real money, even for someone at his income level. But it wasn't about the money. It was about being right. About proving that there were no shortcuts in this business. He'd seen dozens of hotshot MBAs flame out over the years, their theoretical knowledge useless when faced with the irrational, emotional, chaotic reality of actual markets. Jade would be no different. She'd make some early lucky trades, maybe even get ahead initially, and then she'd get cocky. She'd over-leverage or misread a trend, and the market would do what it always did to overconfident traders. It would chew her up and spit her out. Marcus pulled into his building's garage and took the elevator to the 21st floor. His condo was exactly as he'd left it that morning, immaculate, minimalist, expensive. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Lincoln Park and Lake Michigan beyond. The rain-blurred city lights created an impressionist painting of color and motion. He poured himself 2 fingers of 18-year-old Macallan and stood at the window, watching the storm. Somewhere out there, Jade was probably working on her strategy outline, convinced she could beat the odds. Marcus raised his glass in a solitary toast. 2 expensive lessons, he said to his reflection in the window. But his reflection didn't smile back, and for the first time since making the bet, Marcus felt an unfamiliar sensation creeping up his spine. It wasn't quite doubt. He was too confident for that. But it was close. It was the recognition that he'd created a situation with only 2 outcomes: win and prove nothing new, or lose and look like an arrogant fool. He drained his glass and headed to bed, pushing the thought aside. He'd been right about markets for a decade. He'd be right about this too. Outside, the storm continued to build, lightning flickering in the distance over the dark expanse of Lake Michigan. The rain hammered against the windows with increasing intensity, as if the city itself were trying to wash away the hubris and uncertainty of the day. Monday morning would bring new markets, new opportunities, and the official start of a bet that Marcus Chen was absolutely certain he would win. He just wished he felt as certain as he claimed to be. Monday morning arrived with the kind of biting cold that only Chicago in late November could deliver. Marcus stepped out of his building into a wind that felt like it was blowing straight from the Arctic, cutting through his wool overcoat as if it were paper. The weekend storm had passed, leaving behind crystal-clear skies and temperatures that hovered just above freezing. He'd spent most of Sunday reviewing market data and trying not to think about his meeting with Sarah Rodriguez. The bet with Jade had consumed more mental energy than he cared to admit. He'd found himself pulling up agricultural commodity charts at midnight, second-guessing his instincts, looking for any sign that Jade's analysis might have merit. He'd found nothing. The volatility she'd identified was well within historical norms when properly contextualized. She was seeing patterns because she wanted to see patterns, a classic rookie mistake called confirmation bias. Marcus had made the same error early in his career and paid for it with a $15,000 loss that had taken him 3 months to recover. The trading floor was already buzzing when Marcus arrived at 7:15. The opening bell was still more than an hour away, but the energy was palpable. Overnight, Asian markets had shown unexpected strength, and European markets were rallying on positive manufacturing data from Germany. It was shaping up to be a good day. Sarah's assistant intercepted him before he could reach his office. "She's waiting for you," the young man said, gesturing toward Sarah's corner office on the opposite side of the floor. Sarah Rodriguez had been with Henderson and Associates for 18 years, working her way up from junior analyst to senior managing director through a combination of sharp instincts, political acumen, and an ability to navigate the firm's complex personality dynamics. She was 52, originally from San Antonio, and had built her reputation managing the firm's energy trading division before moving into a broader oversight role. Her office was smaller than Marcus's, but felt larger due to the minimalist decor and strategic use of light. She sat behind her desk, reading something on her tablet, and gestured for Marcus to sit without looking up. "Close the door," she said. Marcus complied and took the seat across from her. Through the glass walls, he could see the trading floor beginning to fill with analysts and traders preparing for the day. Several glanced toward Sarah's office with undisguised curiosity. Sarah set down her tablet and fixed Marcus with a level stare. "I'm going to be direct because we don't have time for diplomatic bullshit. What you did Friday was stupid, potentially actionable, and completely unnecessary." Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but Sarah held up a hand. "However," she continued, "it's also done. Jade accepted the terms, I witnessed it, and half the building knows about it. Unwinding it now would create more problems than it solves. So here's how this is going to work." She pulled out a legal document and slid it across the desk. "Both you and Jade are going to sign this. It formalizes the arrangement as an educational mentorship program with a performance bonus structure. That protects the firm from gambling allegations and makes this look like an innovative training initiative rather than a pissing contest." Marcus scanned the document. It was elegantly crafted, turning his impulsive bet into something that could be spun as progressive and forward-thinking. "You had this drawn up over the weekend?" "I had legal working on it Saturday morning," Sarah said. "This is me protecting you, Marcus, and protecting the firm. Don't make me regret it." "I won't," Marcus said, signing the document. "Jade's going to fail, we both know it, and in 6 months she'll have learned a valuable lesson about the difference between theory and practice." Sarah leaned back in her chair, studying him with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. "You haven't actually reviewed her analysis, have you?" "I skimmed it." "Bullshit! You dismissed it without reading it because it challenged your worldview." Sarah pulled up something on her computer and turned the screen toward Marcus. "I had one of our quants run her models through our simulation software over the weekend. She's identified a genuine inefficiency in how the market is pricing climate risk into agricultural futures. Marcus felt a cold knot form in his stomach. That's impossible. If there were an inefficiency that obvious, every algo trading system in the world would have found it already. Would they? Sarah asked. Our systems are programmed based on historical patterns and traditional risk factors. Jade's approach incorporates emerging climate data that most algorithms aren't even considering yet. She's not necessarily right, but she's not obviously wrong either. Marcus stood up, suddenly feeling confined in the small office. So what are you saying? You think she's going to win? I'm saying you made a bet based on ego instead of analysis, and now you're locked into a situation where losing would be very expensive, both financially and professionally. Sarah's tone softened slightly. Marcus, you're one of our best traders, but you have a blind spot when it comes to perspectives that don't align with your own experience. This could be a growth opportunity for you, if you're smart enough to take it. Marcus wanted to argue, to defend his position, but Sarah's expression made it clear the conversation was over. He took the signed document and left her office, his mind churning. Back at his desk, Marcus pulled up Jade's full analysis for the first time. It was a 63-page document, meticulously researched and clearly written. She'd compiled data from climate models, agricultural yield reports, emerging market consumption patterns, and commodity futures pricing going back 20 years. Her central thesis was elegant in its simplicity. Climate change was creating increasing volatility in agricultural production, but the derivatives market was still pricing risk based on pre-climate change historical patterns. This created opportunities to profit from the growing disconnect between projected climate impacts and market pricing. She'd identified specific commodity pairs where the pricing relationship had diverged from historical norms in ways that aligned with climate model predictions. Her proposed strategy involved a series of spread trades, going long on commodities likely to face climate-induced supply shocks, while going short on related commodities with more stable climate profiles. Marcus hated to admit it, but the logic was sound. More than sound, it was innovative. He'd been trading agricultural commodities for a decade and had never thought to approach the market from this angle. His phone buzzed. A message from David Park. Just saw Jade's trading account got funded. 20K. This is really happening, huh? Marcus didn't respond. Instead, he pulled up the trading account Sarah had set up for Jade. $20,000 sat there, waiting to be deployed. According to the terms, Jade would make all trading decisions, but Marcus would receive daily reports on her positions and performance. He watched throughout the morning as Jade made her first trades. She started cautiously, using only about 30% of the capital to establish initial positions. She went long on hard red winter wheat futures, while simultaneously shorting corn futures, a spread trade based on her analysis of how drought patterns were affecting different crop regions. It was textbook risk management. Small initial positions, diversified exposure, defined risk parameters. Exactly what Marcus would have recommended to a new trader. By lunch, her portfolio was up 1.2%. It was a tiny gain, almost meaningless in the grand scheme, but it was a gain nonetheless. Marcus found himself checking the account every few minutes, watching the numbers fluctuate with each market tick. At 1:30, Jade appeared at his office door. She traded her oversized blazer for a perfectly fitted grey suit that looked expensive, probably a purchase she'd made over the weekend, Marcus thought. Her confidence seemed to have crystallized over the past 3 days. "Do you have a minute?" she asked. Marcus gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Make it quick. I'm actually trading real money today." Jade sat down, ignoring the jab. "I wanted to thank you, actually, for the opportunity. And to let you know, I'm taking this seriously." "I can see that," Marcus said, gesturing to his screen where her portfolio was displayed. "You're up $1,200. Congratulations. You've bought yourself a nice dinner." "It's a start," Jade said evenly. "I'm curious, though. Have you actually read my analysis yet?" Marcus hesitated for just a fraction of a second, but it was enough. Jade smiled, a genuine smile, not the nervous one she'd worn during her presentation. "You have," she said, "and you're worried I might actually be onto something." "I'm not worried about anything," Marcus said, but even as he said it, he knew it sounded defensive. "Look, you've had a decent morning. That's fine. But 3 hours of green doesn't make you a trader. Come back when you've survived a real drawdown, when you've watched your analysis fail in real time and had to decide whether to hold or fold. That's when we'll see what you're really made of." Jade stood up. "I'm looking forward to it." "Oh, and Marcus, I know you think experience is the only teacher that matters, but sometimes fresh eyes see things that experienced eyes have become blind to. You might want to remember that." She left before Marcus could formulate a response. Through his office window, he watched her walk across the trading floor, stopping to chat with a few other analysts. They seemed to gravitate toward her, Marcus noticed. She had a warmth, an accessibility that he'd never bothered to cultivate. The afternoon session brought more volatility. Agricultural commodities whipsawed on conflicting crop reports from the USDA. Jade's portfolio swung from up 1.8% to down 0.3% in the span of 30 minutes. Marcus watched with grim satisfaction, expecting to see panic trades, emotional decision-making, the rookie mistakes that always emerged under pressure. Instead, Jade held her positions. She didn't panic sell, didn't double down, didn't do anything except maintain her original strategy. By market close, she was up 0.9% on the day, a respectable return, especially for a first day of trading. Marcus closed out his own positions, his carefully managed portfolio up 1.4%. He'd outperformed Jade, but not by the margin he'd expected. And more troubling, she'd shown discipline that took most traders years to develop. That evening, Marcus found himself at the gym, attacking the treadmill with unusual intensity. Running had always been his way of processing stress, and he logged 8 miles before his mind finally quieted enough to think clearly. The truth he didn't want to admit was that Sarah had been right. He'd made the bet based on ego, not analysis. He'd assumed Jade would fail because she was young, inexperienced, and didn't fit his mental model of what a successful trader looked like. He'd been so focused on what she lacked that he'd failed to see what she brought to the table. Rigorous analysis, fresh perspective, and apparently genuine talent. Back home, Marcus poured himself a drink and stood at his usual spot by the window. The city spread out below him. Millions of lights representing millions of lives, each person convinced they understood the world, each person carrying their own blind spots and biases. He pulled out his phone and did something he rarely did. He called his father. Richard Chen answered on the 3rd ring. "Marcus, is everything okay? You never call on weeknights." "I'm fine, Dad. I wanted to ask you something." Marcus paused, gathering his thoughts. "When you were building your business, did you ever encounter someone whose approach was completely different from yours, but still effective?" Richard Chen had immigrated from Taiwan in the 1970s and built a successful manufacturing company through what he called old-school business practices, hard work, relationship building, and conservative financial management. He'd retired 5 years ago, selling the company for a sum that ensured a comfortable retirement. "Of course," Richard said. "Many times. Why do you ask?" "There's this new analyst at work. Young, different background from mine. I made a bet with her that she couldn't succeed using her approach. And now you're worried she might win," Richard said. It wasn't a question. "Maybe. I don't know. It's only been 1 day." "Marcus," his father said, his voice taking on the patient tone he'd used when Marcus was young and struggling with a problem. "The most expensive lessons I ever learned in business came from assuming that my way was the only way. Some of my biggest successes came from hiring people who thought differently than I did. Different doesn't mean wrong." They talked for another 20 minutes. ranging over topics from business to family to Richard's ongoing golf rivalry with his neighbor. When Marcus finally hung up, he felt something shift inside him. Not a complete transformation, but a hairline crack in the certainty he'd built his identity around. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of market activity and increasingly complex emotions for Marcus. Jade's portfolio continued to perform, not spectacularly, but consistently. She had winning days and losing days, but her overall trend line pointed steadily upward. By the end of week 3, she was up 3%, ahead of the benchmark and ahead of Marcus's own performance. The trading floor dynamic had shifted as well. People were paying attention to Jade now, asking about her strategy, seeking her input on agricultural commodity trades. Marcus watched from his office as she became a center of gravity, drawing people in with her combination of analytical rigor and genuine enthusiasm for the work. David Park cornered Marcus in the break room on a Thursday afternoon. "Dude, you need to talk to Jade." "Why?" Marcus asked, refilling his coffee cup. "Because she's about to make a major move, and if you don't understand what she's doing, you're going to look really stupid when people start asking you about it." Marcus's jaw tightened. "What kind of move?" "She's been building a position in spring wheat futures based on some climate model showing unusual drought patterns developing in the northern plains. Word is, she's going to deploy another 30% of the capital tomorrow. If she's right, it could be huge. If she's wrong, then she'll learn a lesson," Marcus finished. David shook his head. "Man, you really don't see it, do you? This stopped being about proving her wrong weeks ago. She's for real. The question now is whether you're going to be gracious enough to acknowledge it, or whether you're going to become the cautionary tale about ego-destroying careers." Marcus returned to his office without responding. He pulled up Jade's portfolio and saw what David was talking about. She'd been methodically building a position in spring wheat over the past week, small enough to avoid notice, but large enough to matter if she was right. He opened his meteorological data feeds and started cross-referencing them with planting region maps. The pattern Jade had identified was subtle, but undeniable. A high-pressure system was establishing itself over the northern plains, in a configuration that historically led to reduced rainfall during critical growing periods. Traditional trading algorithms wouldn't flag this because it was too early in the season and the pattern was still developing, but if it persisted, it could significantly impact yields, driving prices higher. Jade had spotted an emerging trend before the market had fully priced it in. Marcus sat back in his chair, staring at his monitors. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. Jade wasn't going to fail. She was actually going to win, and he was going to have to figure out what that meant for him. January arrived with the kind of brutal cold that reminded everyone why Chicago was nicknamed the Windy City. Temperatures plunged to -15 Fahrenheit, with wind chills making it feel like -30. The city transformed into a frozen landscape of steam, rising from manholes and office workers hurrying between buildings with their faces buried in scarves. Jade's portfolio weathered the New Year transition beautifully. She'd locked in gains from her wheat position, taking profits at exactly the right moment and rotating capital into new opportunities. By mid-January, her account stood at 26,340, a 31.7% gain in just under 3 months. Marcus had stopped thinking about the bet as a competition he was trying to win. Instead, he found himself genuinely invested in Jade's success, watching her trades not to find flaws, but to understand her methodology. They'd established a routine of weekly lunch meetings where they dissected market trends, challenged each other's assumptions, and explored new analytical frameworks. The transformation in their relationship had been noticed throughout Henderson and Associates. The trading floor dynamic had shifted from competitive and siloed to collaborative and knowledge-sharing. Other senior traders had started hosting similar sessions with junior analysts, creating a culture of mentorship that Sarah enthusiastically promoted. On a Thursday in late January, Marcus received an unexpected call from Tom Henderson himself, the firm's founder and chairman who rarely involved himself in day-to-day operations anymore. "Marcus, good to hear your voice," Tom said in his gravelly baritone. "I've been following the situation with Miss Williams. Impressive work by both of you." "Thank you, sir. Jade deserves most of the credit." "That's not what I'm hearing. I'm hearing that you've demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership and adaptability we need from our senior traders. Which brings me to why I'm calling. Sarah is being promoted to managing director of the entire trading division. We'd like you to take over her current role as senior managing director overseeing agricultural and energy commodities." Marcus felt his breath catch. It was a promotion he'd been working toward for years. More responsibility, more autonomy, and a significant compensation increase. But the timing felt loaded with irony. He was being rewarded for learning humility just as he was about to publicly acknowledge his initial arrogance. "I'm honored, Tom, truly. But I should mention that there's still 3 months left on my arrangement with Jade, and given her performance—" "I'm aware she's going to win your bet," Tom interrupted. "That's part of why we're promoting you. You made a mistake, you learned from it, and you turned a potentially embarrassing situation into something that's benefited the entire firm. That's the kind of judgment we value." They discussed details for another 15 minutes. Marcus would start the new role in March, which would give him time to transition his current portfolio and responsibilities. He hung up, feeling a complex mixture of pride and discomfort. He was succeeding despite, or perhaps because of, his willingness to admit he'd been wrong. That evening, Marcus found Jade still at her desk, reviewing charts on 3 different monitors. The trading floor had largely emptied, leaving just a handful of late-night workers and the hum of computer systems. "Do you have a minute?" Marcus asked. Jade looked up, noting the unusual seriousness in his expression. "Of course. What's up?" "I got a promotion today. I'm taking over Sarah's role in March." "Marcus, that's fantastic." Jade's enthusiasm was genuine. "You've earned it." "Have I, though?" Marcus sat down across from her. "I made a spectacularly bad judgment call about you. I let my ego override my analytical skills. If anything, the past few months have exposed flaws I didn't even know I had." "And you've addressed those flaws," Jade countered. "You've grown. That's what leadership actually looks like. Not being perfect, but being willing to evolve." Marcus shook his head. "I'm about to publicly lose a $20,000 bet and donate $50,000 to a scholarship fund. That's going to cost me $70,000 total because I couldn't see past my own biases." "Is it, though?" Jade asked. She minimized her charts and turned to face him fully. "Let's do the math differently. You've learned to incorporate climate data into your analysis that's already improved your returns by at least 2% quarter over quarter. On your portfolio size, that's worth way more than $70,000 annually. You've built a collaborative relationship with the rising star analyst in the firm. That's career insurance you can't put a price on. And you've demonstrated to senior leadership that you're capable of growth and self-reflection, which just earned you a major promotion." "When you put it that way." "The best investments aren't always about immediate financial returns," Jade said. "Sometimes you invest in relationships, in knowledge, in personal growth. Those pay dividends for years." Marcus felt something shift in his perspective. Another crack in the old certainty, another moment of clarity. "You know what's crazy? I've spent my entire career thinking about ROI, opportunity costs, and risk-adjusted returns. But I never thought to apply that framework to my own professional development." "Most people don't," Jade said. "We get comfortable. We get good at something, and we stop investing in our own growth. But markets change. Industries change. If we don't change with them, we become obsolete." "A deal." They talked for another hour, and Marcus found himself sharing concerns and uncertainties he'd never voiced before. The pressure of the new role, his worry that he'd peaked professionally, his fear that he'd spent so much time building expertise that he'd forgotten how to be a beginner at anything. Jade listened without judgment, offering perspectives shaped by her own experience, as someone who'd had to prove herself every day in an industry that didn't always welcome newcomers who looked like her or thought like her. "Can I tell you something?" Jade said as they prepared to leave. "That first day, when you made the bet, I almost walked out. I almost decided this industry wasn't worth it if that's how senior people treated newcomers." "What changed your mind?" "My grandmother." Jade smiled at the memory. "I called her that night, ready to quit before I'd really started. She told me about when she integrated a previously all-white high school in Alabama in 1965. The amount of hostility and resistance she faced made your skepticism look like a warm welcome. She said, 'Baby, if you run from every room where someone doubts you, you'll spend your whole life running. Sometimes you have to stay and prove them wrong.'" Marcus felt shame wash over him. "I'm sorry. I never thought about how my behavior might have felt beyond just professional skepticism." "I know you didn't. That's kind of the point. We all have blind spots shaped by our own experiences and privileges. The question is what we do when those blind spots get illuminated." February brought a brief warming trend that teased spring before winter reasserted its dominance. Jade's portfolio continued its steady climb, crossing the $30,000 threshold in early February and reaching $32,850 by mid-month, a 64.25% gain in just over 4 months. The achievement attracted more media attention. The Wall Street Journal ran a feature on her approach to climate-informed trading. CNBC invited her on for a segment about next-generation market analysis. Bloomberg asked her to contribute a monthly column on emerging risk factors in commodities markets. Through it all, Jade remained grounded, constantly crediting Marcus for the opportunity and acknowledging that her success was built on the foundation of established analytical frameworks that traders like Marcus had developed over decades. Marcus watched her navigate the attention with the same grace she'd brought to everything else. She was becoming a genuine thought leader in the industry, and she was doing it while barely into her second year out of business school. On a Friday in late February, with just 2 weeks left before the official end of their 6-month arrangement, Marcus called a meeting with Jade and Sarah. "I've made a decision," Marcus said once they were all seated in Sarah's office. "I'm not going to wait until the 6 months are up. Jade has clearly won the bet. She's quintupled my target return and proven her analytical approach has genuine merit. I'd like to make the donation to the scholarship fund now and issue the public acknowledgement we agreed to." "You don't have to do that," Jade said. "We had a 6-month agreement. I want to see it through." "Why?" Marcus asked. "So I can watch your returns climb even higher and make my initial skepticism look even more absurd." "No," Jade said firmly, "because I want to prove it wasn't a fluke. Anyone can have a good 4 months. I want to demonstrate that this approach works over a full 6-month cycle through different market conditions and economic scenarios. I want the success to be unquestionable." Sarah nodded approvingly. "Jade's right. Seeing it through to the end makes the achievement more significant. Plus, Marcus, you could learn a lot in these last 2 weeks." Marcus relented, and the final 2 weeks became an intensive collaboration. He and Jade co-authored a white paper on integrating climate risk modeling into traditional commodities analysis. They presented joint workshops to the firm's trading teams. They even made a presentation to Tom Henderson and the board about establishing a formal climate risk analysis division. The 6-month mark arrived on March 14th, a Tuesday that dawned cold and grey, snow flurries dancing in the wind off Lake Michigan. Jade's final portfolio value, $34,070, a 73, 35% return in 6 months. The firm hosted a celebration in the main conference room. Traders, analysts, and senior leadership gathered to acknowledge not just Jade's achievement, but the transformation it had catalyzed across the organization. Marcus stood at the front of the room, acutely aware that this was the moment he'd dreaded 6 months ago, the public acknowledgement of his error. But looking out at the assembled faces, including Jade's warm smile, he felt no dread, just gratitude. 6 months ago, I made a bet, Marcus began. I wagered that experience would always trump innovation, that traditional approaches would always outperform new methodologies, and that a rookie trader couldn't possibly see things that seasoned professionals had missed. I was wrong on all counts. He detailed Jade's returns, the sophistication of her approach, and the broader impact her work had had on the firm's trading strategies. Then he presented a check for $50,000 to the Northwestern Kellogg Diversity in Finance Scholarship Fund, accepted by the school's dean who'd made the trip to Chicago for the event. But here's what I didn't anticipate, Marcus continued. The real value wasn't in the money, or even in Jade's impressive returns. It was in what this experience taught me, and hopefully all of us, about the importance of remaining open to new ideas, regardless of their source, about the danger of letting our expertise become arrogance, about the reality that the best teams aren't built from people who all think alike, but from people who challenge each other's assumptions and expand each other's perspectives. Jade stepped forward to speak, and Marcus was struck again by how much she'd grown in confidence. When Marcus made this bet, I saw it as a challenge to prove myself. But it became something more valuable, a partnership that's made me a better analyst and, I hope, made Marcus a better mentor. The returns in my account are impressive, but the returns on this investment in collaboration and mutual learning, those are incalculable. The celebration continued for another hour, but Marcus found himself outside on the building's observation deck, needing a moment alone with his thoughts. The snow had stopped, and patches of blue were breaking through the clouds. Spring was coming, even to Chicago. He heard the door open behind him and wasn't surprised to find Jade joining him at the railing. "Congratulations," Marcus said. "You earned every penny. Thank you for the opportunity, for the challenge, and for being willing to grow alongside me." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city spread out below them. Marcus thought about all the assumptions he'd carried into that conference room 6 months ago, all the certainties that had been slowly dismantled by experience and evidence. "I've been thinking," Jade said, "about your new role starting next week. You're going to need strong analytical support, people who can challenge your thinking and bring fresh perspectives." "Are you applying for the job?" Marcus asked with a smile. "Actually, I'm thinking bigger. The white paper we wrote about establishing a climate risk division. I want to build that. I want to create a team that specializes in identifying emerging risk factors that traditional analysis misses. And I want you to champion it to the board." Marcus turned to look at her, seeing the vision taking shape behind her eyes. It was ambitious, innovative, and exactly the kind of forward-thinking initiative the firm needed. "Let's do it," he said. "But on one condition." "Oh, what's that?" "You let me invest my own money in your next fund, because if the past 6 months have taught me anything, it's that betting against you is a losing proposition." Jade laughed, and the sound carried across the observation deck, bright and clear against the Chicago skyline. Below them, the city continued its endless cycle of commerce and ambition, millions of individual stories of success and failure, growth and stagnation, certainty and doubt. Marcus Chen had started this journey convinced he had nothing to learn from Jade Williams. He was ending it, knowing he'd learned the most valuable lesson of his career, that true wisdom wasn't about knowing all the answers, but about being humble enough to ask better questions. The bet had cost him $70,000, but it had earned him something far more valuable, the understanding that the best investment he could make was in his own continued growth, and that the people who challenged him the most were often the ones who had the most to teach him. As they headed back inside to rejoin the celebration, Marcus felt a sense of anticipation he hadn't experienced in years. The markets would open tomorrow with new opportunities and challenges. He'd face them with fresh eyes, a more open mind, and a partner who'd proven that innovation and tradition weren't opposing forces, but complementary strengths. Sometimes the best outcomes came from the bets you lost. Marcus Chen had learned that the hard way, and he wouldn't have had it any other way.